I honor now the great queen, Anne Morgan, shrieking terror of the skies, blood-stained and gilded feathers, regal and feral, chooser of the slain and chooser of victory. I sing of your praises, in your honor, and of your mighty deeds. Celtic Lore and Spellcraft of the Dark Goddess by Stephanie Woodfield is one of the worst books I've ever read about the Morrigan. It's frankly one of the worst witchcraft books I've ever read. It was published in 2012, and I would say By God Does It Show, but frankly, it has the vibes of a 2007 or a 1990 book about a goddess. The Morrigan is the Irish goddess of battle and prophecy, kingship and war. She is often depicted as three sisters. The Morrigan may be a title or maybe a name. As a title, when she is in triplicate, the name refers to Bav, Macha, and the Morrigan again, whose name might be Anu, or it might not be. Parts of her are shrouded in mystery, I think mostly because modern American readers are trying to look at her through familiar lenses, and she's not. She's not a goddess in the shape of any sort of Christianity, and she's not a goddess in the shape of ancient Greek and Roman deities, which is like where a lot of pagans and people first like learn about mythology. She's a little more fluid. The Irish gods don't really have domains the way the Greek and Roman ones do. Calling the Morrigan the goddess of war and sovereignty and battle and bloodshed and prophecy is not disingenuous, but it doesn't necessarily give you an accurate picture of her. Celtic gods, Irish gods, tend to be more characters in a story. Morrigan may mean great queen or phantom queen, depending on where and whether you put the accent mark. Either one kind of makes sense. She's the wife of Andagda, the good god, who's an excellent warrior and druid and chieftain and father. And she shows up in stories about kingship and leadership and whether or not someone has the right to lead. She also, in the Caf Moitura, the Second Battle of Moitura, after the war is over and the Tuatha De Danann have successfully defeated the Fomorians, Bav, one of the Morrigans, gives a long prophecy. And that's where we get the idea that she's a goddess of prophecy. She also does other prophecies and tells the future, but this book. The problem with this book, Celtic Lore and Spellcraft of the Dark Goddess, Invoking the Morrigan, in order to be 400 pages, Stephanie Woodfield has had to pad things out and in the process add things to the Morrigan that are simply not attested to in mythology or are fucking false. The most obvious is that she says that the Morrigan and Morgan Le Fay are the same, and that Morgan Le Fay is the Welsh or Breton, or at least related version of the Morrigan. And that's simply incorrect. The Morrigan, Morrigan in Irish, referring to the Morrigan, means great queen or phantom queen. The Morgan of Morgan Le Fay means sea queen. It's a Welsh and Irish are different languages. And we really don't see any overlaps between Morgan Le Fay and the Morrigan, other than they are both women who use sorcery. In part because Morgan Le Fay has been told and retold so many times that it's tough to get an idea of what pre-Christian Wales would have thought of her and what they conceived of her and what she would be. The story, the Arthur cycle has been told and edited so many times and with so many explicit political biases that you can't really, even if there was a shared root between Morgan Le Fay and the Morrigan, there isn't. Uh, they would be so distinct at this point. The roles that they take in their stories are different. The Morgan Le Fay is largely an antagonist of King Arthur, the rightful king, whereas the Morrigan is an ally and a leader of the rightful, the heroes of Cath Maithura, and an antagonist of Tengol Cooley, the cattle raid of Cooley. And she's just kind of a character who shows up in other places. She's a little bit of antagonist, a little bit of the hand of fate in the destruction of Dodurga's hostel. She plays so many more parts, and when she's an antagonist, she's not the antagonist of the rightful king. When talking about faces and parts of the Morrigan and names of the Morrigan, Stephanie Woodfield also claims that Anya, Irish sun goddess, is the same as Anu, which might be the Morrigan, who might be the Morrigan, and who is an earth sovereignty goddess. The sun and the earth are different. And then by claiming that Anya is Anu, Woodfield also connects the Morrigan to Grania, who's kind of more of a wintry sun goddess. And it's bad scholarship. Just because two words sound the same to English ears and English eyes doesn't mean that the two words are connected, especially when those words are in Old Irish. Woodfield also conflates, or not conflate, but in her section on different faces and names of the Morrigan, says that Modron, as in Mabanach Modron, is a face of the Morrigan. And Modron is simply Welsh again. Right? Is that what she's fucking saying? I can't believe. Yeah, she straight up thinks, yeah, Modron was the Morrigan's counterpart in Welsh mythology, the Welsh mother goddess and a goddess of fertility. There's literally nothing about them that is similar. The famous Irish folklorist Lady Gregory tells us that Anya was the Morrigu herself. It cites Lady Gregory, who is notable for being kind of a bad translator of Irish myths. She was doing shit in the 1800s, and there are better translations out there now. Do not rely on Lady Gregory. The Morrigan was a river goddess and associated with bodies of water. No. She cleaned herself in a river once, and cleaned her clothes in a river once. Rivers are where you clean yourself. Sorry, this is just so incredibly... Speaking of broadening a goddess to the point where she's no longer recognizable, that's the problem, sorry. The problem with broadening a goddess so far and connecting the Morrigan not only to her two sisters and maybe understanding the connections between the Morrigan and other goddesses, but like the connection, but instead saying that they are closely linked and saying that Anya might be a regional name for Anu, or saying that because Grania is a goddess of healing, then the Morrigan must be as well. You lose sight of the actual goddess. It's like if you hear somebody talking about you and how in college you took a woodworking class and therefore you understand carpentry. And more than that, it's like somebody, upon hearing that you took carpentry class or woodworking class in college, hired you to build them a bookshelf and then got mad that you said no. Or bought you a bunch of woodworking supplies. It's rude. It's disrespectful. Learn and interact with the goddess herself. While we're talking about fundamentally misunderstanding a goddess, Stephanie Woodfield's creates a bunch of labels and faces of the Morrigan, including, the prophet, fine, the warrior, fine, the lover, and the Earth Mother are my problems. The justification for calling the Morrigan a love and sex and fertility goddess is that on Samhain in the Captain Moitura, she bathed in the river and met Andagda, her husband. They had sex, and then in the morning, as part of their pillow talk, they discussed what they were going to do and divided tasks for the upcoming battle. Also, she comes on to Cuchulainn a little bit, and then she gets mad that he doesn't want to have sex with her. But the thing is, having sex with your husband doesn't make you a love goddess. And half of the reason the Morrigan got mad, most of the reason the Morrigan got angry with Cuchulainn for not having sex with her when she offered, is because he was rude about it. If the Morrigan were a love goddess, we would see her interacting not only in her own love stories, but in other people's love stories. We would see her stories being a lot more about being in love. If you're a very common reading of the Tamil Cooley is that Maeve is an aspect of the Morrigan, Queen Maeve. She starts the whole thing, and it starts with her in bed with her husband comparing cattle. And that scene isn't about sex or love. It's about power, and it's about whether or not her husband respects her and understands that she is the sovereign, she is the queen, and her status is higher than his. She is the Dagda's wife, but we don't see them get married and fall in love and have kissing moments. We see them have sex once and plan once. They probably do love each other, but if she were a goddess of love, the stories would focus on that. If she were a goddess of love, she would be motivated by love. She's not. She's motivated by power and by justice and duty. And Stephanie Woodfield thinking that the Morrigan is a love and fertility and sex goddess is part of why the book feels so dated, because the Morrigan community, the community of Morrigan devotees on the internet, has been saying, yo, she's not a sex goddess for years. I am certain some of these posts were well before the 2012 publication date of this book. But we had to add another chapter. We had to bulk out this book and get it to 390 pages. So we might as well talk about her as a love goddess. And we might as well talk about her as an Earth Mother. My critique of the Morrigan as an Earth Mother is a little more nuanced. Because yes, she does have children in one text. Her stories are not about being a mother. Her stories are not about giving birth. They're not about raising children. Her children are largely a footnote. And as a representation of the right to kingship, she is connected to the land, but not in a way of being the vegetation and being the fertility of the land and being the, the life and the green. If she was that sort of Earth Mother, she would have stories about green things thriving when she is here and green things withering when she is not. She is instead a goddess of, do you specifically have the right to be on this specific patch of land and manage it? Is it correct for you to be the one making the calls and deciding what should happen on this land and to these people who are connected to this land? And she's a goddess of, when you are no longer performing your duties, when you are no longer acting in right relationship with the land and with your people, you no longer have the right to rule. And that's not an Earth Mother. Calling her an Earth Mother is lazy. It is very common for Americans, non-Irish people, people who just simply are existing now in our current version of patriarchy as opposed to Iron Age Celtic patriarchy. People who are very familiar with a certain type of goddess and not other types, to see a woman and assume that she is a sex or land goddess. Because there are so many. It feels like every Indo-European culture has daddy god, a war god, a death god, a love goddess who is different from the wife of the daddy god, and an earth goddess, and maybe a cool ocean guy. And when you see that pattern so often, it's very easy to project it onto other gods that don't necessarily fit that. Ireland does have a cool daddy god, but he's also kind of not the only chief and not the only head. He's not, in fact, the head of the Taha de Danann because they're named after Danu. And especially when modern patriarchy, where women are very often, their default states are wife, mother, and vagina. Truly, the default woman state is vagina for giving birth, having fun, and long-term relationships. It's interesting that we keep on projecting those roles onto goddesses. So anyone who calls the Morrigan an earth mother, a lover, a sex and fertility goddess is on my shit list. Past the extremely bad mythology, I have other problems with this book. I can't believe my problems are not just the bad mythology and the bad understanding of Celtic, Iron Age Celtic society. The rituals and the prose of this book are really Wiccan, which isn't inherently bad, but if you're going to say that you are a book about Celtic lore and spellcraft and a book about the Morrigan, you have to be upfront when you are adding Wiccan influences and Wiccan assumptions.
What do I mean by this?
The book refers to the Maiden Mother Crone Trinity, and this is the mother face of the Morrigan, this is the maiden face of the Morrigan, this is the crone face. And the thing is, that is ahistorical and a very modern invention, and it is something that screams Wiccan. The Morrigan is a triple goddess in that she is one goddess and also three goddesses in a trench coat, and also three goddesses standing next to each other doing their own things. And this sort of triple goddess shows up a lot in mythology. Bridget is another three sisters who are also one sister, who are also three sisters in a trench coat. The Fates and the Morie, the Fates and the Furies, and sometimes Hecate, sometimes not, and the Norse Fates, they're all, similarly three goddesses who work together and can be invoked at once, but also have their own things. Hecate is a little bit interesting because she's not actually three people in a trench coat. Hecate was drawn as having three faces and three parts to her, to reference the fact that she is a goddess of the crossroads and she can see all of the crossroads. But in the thousands of years since, we have kind of seen her as a triple goddess in the same three women in a trench coat, three women standing next to each other type of way. But none of these women are Maiden Mother Crone. Conceivably, maybe the Norse and Greco-Roman fates can be drawn like that, since they are the past, present, and future, but they're not always drawn like that. They're not always depicted like that. And so, to bring that framing, that Maiden Mother Crone framing, into a discussion of the Morrigan is ahistorical. It's bad mythology, and it's just Wiccan stuff that you don't admit that you're adding. All of the rituals in this book start with invoking the four elements, the four Greek elements, the fire, water, earth, air, which has great founding in ceremonial magic. It works great in a lot of modern traditions. It's not Irish. The Celts didn't divide the world up into four, they divided the world up into three because they're obsessed with threes. They care about the land, the sea, and the sky, and fire isn't really an element. And fire isn't really an element. Frankly, land, sea, and sky aren't elements, they are realms. And of course, sometimes the rituals say the goddess and her consort. And yes, the Morrigan does have a husband. It's weird. Frankly, I do like the idea of calling the Dagda her consort. But that language is again very Wiccan because Wicca worships a god and a goddess together. If you're gonna give me a book about the Morrigan and you're gonna make it Wiccan, tell me at the top that you're Wiccan. And then my final note, this book is so big because there are path workings for every chapter to meet different faces of the Morrigan. And in the chapter on other goddesses connected to the Morrigan, who are the Morrigan, there's also a path working for each of those. And most of the goddesses or faces have oils and incense recipes with them. There are lots of spells and rituals, but all of them feel very similar. Which really feels like Woodfield was just saying, okay, if I'm talking about a goddess, clearly you want an oil. But the oil recipes aren't justified, they're not explained, they're just kind of thrown in there as a perfunctory, this needs to be there. And it bulks up the book. Meditations or path workings don't really give you much beyond being 1,000 words to think about, like 1,000 words, 1,000 word picture. This book was such a waste of my time. And that's actually fine because I didn't buy it. I got it at like a swap, which is good because if I had spent money on this, I would be so mad that I had wasted it. Instead, I just wasted several nights of reading. What should you read instead? Well, remember how I was talking about the online Morrigan devotee community? One of the big names is Morgan Daimler. They have 2 books from Moon Books. We've got The Morrigan, Meeting the Great Queens, and Raven Goddess. Raven Goddess, going deeper with the Morrigan, which are really short, really cheap. The list price is $11 US. And the thing is that Daimler has not only a good understanding of the mythology, but also learned Old Irish and has translated some of these texts themselves to get a better idea and understanding of what the texts mean and what that means for modern day devotees of the Morrigan. Raven Goddess in particular is about misconceptions and misunderstandings and confusion that shows up with the Morrigan, so Stephanie Woodfield should read this book. Then I would also recommend The Morrigan, Celtic Goddess of Might and Magic by Courtney Weber. Celtic Goddess of Magic and Might. Courtney Weber is Wiccan. Also, when she provides spells, she doesn't provide them in a Wiccan context. When she talks about the Morrigan, she doesn't say that she's a maiden mother crone. When she writes a spell, it's not for setting up the 4 elements. It also has pages that are by other people, other devotees of the Morrigan, which I think is just a really interesting, like, you don't just hear exactly what Weber thinks. And then I haven't actually read this yet because I'm a clown, but The Book of the Great Queen by Morphus Ravana is a chonk of a book. Thank you for listening to me yell about a book that I hated. Now that I've filmed this, I can actually throw this in the trash where it belongs. that's been taking up room in one of my drawers for so long. Feel free to like and subscribe for more. I post videos about priestessing and witchcraft and druidry and paganism. Uh, Sometimes it's something very targeted to a specific practice. Sometimes it's about pagan culture overall, like my video on fascism. Sometimes it's just a fun little crafting video. This has been Kate Bogg, one of many lanterns. Here's hoping you shine bright.